Well, I think the most powerful thing you can say to anybody in the organization is, I believe in you. And I think that if you're giving somebody an assignment that's a little bit of a stretch and you're coupling that with, I'm doing this because I believe in you, versus I'm doing this because it's convenient for me, or I'm doing this because we don't have anybody else to do it. But really believing that message of, I believe in you and I'm going to help you succeed. That's so key and so critical to how you get people to step up into those roles.
You are listening to Power Marketing with Kevin Lee. Kevin and his agency Did It have helped thousands of businesses win through superior marketing, as have his books, articles, speaking engagements, and the E-Marketing Association Power Marketing Podcasts. Here's Kevin.
I'm Kevin Lee with the E-Marketing Association. I also run Did It, a digital first agency that sort of became full service as a result of 11 acquisitions. I own Truth Nutrition, a supplement company, and a bunch of other stuff under the incubator. Super excited to be chatting with Andy Freed today, who was actually involved in Sempo.org as a fractional executive director, along with himself and the other members of the virtual team. So I'm super excited to be catching up with him because he wrote a book recently called Lead Like the Boss. And the boss in this case is Bruce Springsteen. So let's start with the catalyst for you deciding that this needed to be a book and you needed to get it out on paper and digitally.
First, Kevin, first, thanks for having me. And I'll say that, I'm one of these people who is, this close from selling everything I own and just following Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band around the world. I've seen him about 100 times live in concert, and we'll keep going until he stops. And he said he's gonna keep going until he drops. So it's a good arrangement. But I was flying home from a show in Phoenix and decided to write a LinkedIn post about just what I had taken away from the show. Now, I did that both because I had learned something and also to justify yet another trip out to a Bruce Springsteen concert in my mind and the minds of those around me. But when I wrote that, I got a lot of great feedback from folks of, wow, this is kind of interesting. It's an interesting framework to look at stuff, and decided over time that maybe it's time to expand that LinkedIn post to a book, and did that over the last few years.
Great. Well, one through line for the book is storytelling, which of course Bruce is a master of telling stories through music, right, and lyrics, and so that's obviously critical for marketing more than ever, I think, and that's both traditional marketing and the sales element of marketing. But one area where you focused on the book is that storytelling also is an internal vehicle, right? As a leader, right? You need to tell stories to your internal teams so that you're all on the same wavelength and all on the same path. So I'd love for you to drill down on that a little bit and talk about the frameworks for making sure your storytelling is clear and on point and resonates with folks.
Yeah, I think the challenge is that storytelling and so much of presenting communication is kind of deceptively easy these days. And people think that I can click join on a Zoom or click new on PowerPoint, and lo and behold, I'm going to start communicating with somebody. But it takes a lot more forethought than that. And what's key with Bruce on his storytelling is the intentionality of it. He's very intentional with where he uses in the concert, with how he tells the story and the elements of it. And I'm a big believer in the think, feel, do construct. That you start out with, before you start communicating, before you click new in PowerPoint, open a blank sheet of paper and just take out a blank sheet of paper and a pen, and old school, write down what do you want your audience to think, which is kind of the on the level what the takeaway should be. How do you want them to feel? Do you want them to feel challenged? Do you want them to feel safe? Do you want them to feel inspired? And then what's the action step of what you want them to do? And you can do that in any size meeting. That can work for a thousand person conference, or a one-on-one performance review. Either one is important to kind of have intentionality on what you want people to think, feel, and do, and that's where it all starts. And so many people omit that key step and just it's like they go on stage and just start playing and hoping for the best.
Yeah, well, some level of planning is key. So I'd love to hear the planning that you put into one of my favorite things that you've done for many, many years, which is your annual vacation message video, right? That people get when they're trying to reach you during the typically I think it was mid August or late
Yep.
August, and the level of production quality that went into that, and the storytelling and the thinking and the messaging was really quite inspirational to me. So I'd love to think through or have you relay that tradition that you've had, as well as sort of how you went through the thought process for it.
Yeah, I mean, so that is something which I've been doing for about 15 years, is making these parody videos, and they've gotten kind of a following unto themselves. I got to a point where I was getting so many emails when I was on vacation from people who were asking to see my out of office message, that I set up their own website and set up its own kind of channel on YouTube. But the message on them is twofold. There's an element of, do I want people to think? Well, I want them to take away that. I'm out of the office, here are the dates, and I'm having some fun doing it. But there's also an underlying message, which is if I can take the most mundane activity, which is, sending out a message that just says I'm out of the office, and turn it into something fun, and turn it into something that's memorable. That tells a story for, what I can do with an organization and helping with their marketing, helping them with their communication, and tells a story and challenges all of us of, can we take the mundane in our lives and take the things that are just routine and add a little sparkle to them and add a little sizzle to them and make them more interesting to people? And I think that that's something which is lost on folks. Again, how many times have you been in a conference where you're seeing somebody droning on, reciting the PowerPoint slide, reading off the PowerPoint bullet points that are on the screen, versus doing something that's a little bit creative and a little bit different that sticks with you. And if you combine the two, the storytelling and that sparkle, you get something that people actually remember.
So one of the things that I really, found for that sparkle was I was shocked at the level of engagement you got from your team. And it's a testament to your hiring, but it's also a testament to your ability to persuade people who might not be as much of a ham as you are, to get on camera and participate in the creation or co-creation of these out of office vacation videos. The first time you did one, did you get interesting sort of pushback, or sort of did you have to really lay out the vision for them?
Yeah, I mean, and you're absolutely right. Not everyone likes to be on camera. Not everyone likes to be the center of attention. But some of it's a little bit of selecting the right people, but it's giving them an opportunity and making it easy for them. And back to kind of the think, feel, do. How do I make them feel safe in doing this? How do I make them feel like you're going to do this and you're not going to get ridiculed? You're going to do this, and we're going to make sure that it's done in a way that you look and kind of are portrayed as you're portrayed at your best. Understanding that as I communicate with them, it's back to that same construct of, I want them to feel safe. I want them to feel like this is something they can do and have fun doing it. And then there's a key element also of what I want them to do. I don't want to leave that to chance, because, people don't really, if I just put the camera on you and say, okay, now Kevin, be funny, that's really challenging. But if I say you need to deliver this line and have this expression on your face, and do it in response to this, well, people can handle that. It's really making that more explicit for folks.
For sure. So one of the challenges that a lot of folks in the services industry face, and I'll include Did It as an agency in that bucket, and many others, and actually a lot of commodities in products as well, is differentiation, right? So as you and the marketing team at Virtual thought about, okay, here's what we do. We fractionalize executive director positions, but we also provide back office, everything you would need to manage an association that's perhaps too small, right, to have full-time staff in all of these roles. You still had to figure out how to differentiate and message, right, and come up with a way to repeat that message enough times that it sunk in, because the timing is sometimes off, right?
Hmm.
If you're reaching the board of an organization, or somebody in a role that really shouldn't be in that role, right, and should need the help and professionalization that you guys did, you have to make sure that the message was consistent, repeatable, and pushed all the right emotional buttons, but also the logical buttons. So how did you and the marketing team evolve that messaging over the years, right? And come up and craft that message for virtual.
Some of that is also starting to think about it at a higher level. And if we describe our company as, well, we'll answer your phone, we'll send out your invoices, we'll update your website, that puts my feet to sleep. If I talk instead about how we're going to help your organization make its mark on the world, and we know how to do it, and we're going to help you make your mark in a way that is going to be faster and better, than you can do so on your own. That's a much more interesting message, and kind of up leveling it to really what are we trying to do in the end, instead of all those little steps that you do along the way. And I know that that's something you do really well with Did It, is the idea of like, well, it's not about the little things that you do and search optimization or whatever it might be. It's about the results that you're getting for it. And telling that story is a lot of what we've tried to do with our own marketing, is tell the story of, not how, virtual runs all of these logistics, which we do, but, we're also able to help, can point fingers and say, well, we help make payment cards secure all around the world. And that's something which is, a great thing to accomplish, and people want to be behind that, both as our clients and as our staff.
Yeah, so on the staffing side, obviously, all of us in the services business that have executive teams, right, need to figure out how to clone ourselves and empower our teams to become just as good as us and better than us in their subject matter expertise, right? And that's a leadership element. And you talk a lot about leadership in the book, lead like a boss. I'd love to hear, how the frameworks apply to internal messaging and internal training and communications.
Yeah, look at what Bruce Springsteen has done. He's not a solo act; he's a band. And in his last tour, he had 19 other musicians on stage with him. And you're absolutely right that Bruce can do a lot of things. He can't play the trombone, he can't play the trumpet, and he has a brass section on stage of people that can. And how do you leverage that? And how do you make sure that they're better at what they do and inspired to be better, every day by the way he treats them as their boss, that they're inspired to give their very best. It's the same thing with any company and that's something which a lot of leaders struggle with, is this idea of, I need to hire people that are better than me at something. A lot of leaders look at that. Well, then what can I possibly teach them if they're better than me? That's okay. You want them to be better than you at a different subject matter. You want them to be able to push you and push your organization. But we struggle with that as leaders, and struggle with the idea of hiring people that are in fact going to challenge us and push us, and instead often go to our comfort zone of, somebody who is going to be more subservient to us.
Yeah, I'd love to, tangential to that, right? You want to delegate as much as possible, and you want to delegate in such a way that when you're delegating, it's a stretch for the individual you're
Hmm.
delegating to, but not too much of a stretch. Or if it is a bit too
Yeah.
much of a stretch, to provide that proper level of supervision and feedback. So I'd love to hear how you've thought through that process of always giving people something that's a bit of a stretch, something that makes, you know, the band a better trombone, a better trombonist or a better keyboardist or whatever, right? How do you get folks to grow and stretch within your organization?
Well, I think the most powerful thing you can say to anybody in the organization is, I believe in you. And I think that if you're giving somebody an assignment that's a little bit of a stretch, and you're coupling that with, I'm doing this because I believe in you, versus I'm doing this because it's convenient for me, or I'm doing this because we don't have anybody else to do it. But really believing that message of, I believe in you and I'm going to help you succeed. That's so key and so critical to how you get people to step up into those roles. And then as they do, showing appreciation along the way. And we'll talk more about appreciation and, how that's something which Bruce has done so well, and something which we try to emulate as well. But all of those pieces are so critical. And it goes back again to the think, feel, do. You want the person to feel supported in this case. If they feel that this challenge comes without support, then they're going to feel like they're in it all on their own. And nobody wants to feel lonely in a spot that they're not certain.
Yes, I mentioned appreciation. Obviously, appreciation of staff is key in helping them feel like they're growing within an organization. And I think one of the other things you've done really well is make your clients feel appreciated, right? Which I think a lot of folks in tangential industries or similar positions to you and your team forget, right? Is that the client needs to be appreciated as well. What are some messaging methodologies that you found sort of beyond the holiday gift or holiday card to make that part of day to day?
There's no substitute for being interested in people and just knowing who they are and knowing what matters to them. So something which, we really try to do is get to know our clients as people, and not just the organizations they represent, but knowing that, that the beach matters to you. And that knowing that, that Kevin's a quintessential New Yorker, so he's probably still on a high from the next championship. But understanding who our clients are as people so we can connect with them on kind of that episodic basis is so important. I'll say something that got lost during COVID was the first 10 minutes of every meeting. And those 10 minutes are where people often get to know each other, where you're kind of shooting the breeze about what's happening. Well, during COVID, we started to get to a point where you just clicked on the meeting and just started. Well, everyone's here, let's go. And people lost those relationships and lost the basis for trust, which comes from those relationships, from getting to know one another as people. So that's something which, we really try to be conscious of keeping around, of still making sure that, if the meeting starts at 10 or the meeting starts at 10:05 and at 10:05, we spent a few minutes talking about one another and understanding who's on the call, that can really start to build a reservoir of trust that you dip into later on.
Yes, that brings me to one thing that has thankfully changed since the pandemic is the return of in-person events. And I would imagine this is also key for a lot of the clients of virtual, or the associations and trying to bring humanity back, right? And so now you're actually bringing humanity back in the age of AI, right? So it's not
Hmm.
even just post-COVID. It's, in the age of AI, humanity matters more than ever. So what are some best practices that you think need to be either put in place or reinvigorated now that folks are back in the events business, either as associations or general business people are starting to layer in their marketing budgets for events again?
I think for first, I agree with you. That's so important that these are back, and was such an omission when we had to have that thought of, oh, we'll just do everything, everything for lack of a better word, virtually. I'm for that for my business. I'm not for that for events. But I think one thing which is key is people have kind of lost or never learned the ability of how to get to know one another at these events, and facilitating people networking and facilitating and making that easier is so important. You have a generation of folks that went through kind of that college early professional days working fully remotely. So the idea of you're going to go to an event and your job at networking is to talk to some strangers, and you're not just talk to the other people from Did It that are there, but I want you to talk to the people from the other agencies that are there and get to know some people and, scout talent for us. Well, they don't even know how to do that and how to approach it. So giving the right coaching on that and helping people understand, here's how you do that and here's how it works. If somebody went to remote school and then started their job remotely, they just haven't had those critical first years of watching and emulating that you and I did, when we got into the industry. I think it's really important that organizations make that very explicit and make that as easy as possible for people as they're doing it.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring that up because one of the things we were ideating about for the e-marketing association, which events might be of interest to sort of the general population of business people, was the idea of personal branding and how it had essentially the some of the skills around personal branding had fallen by the wayside as a result of all the
Yep,
things that you mentioned. And during the conversation, we even talked about how it's gotten in the way of people's ability to date and relate, right? Not just in a
absolutely.
business context, right? It's sort of they had sort of potentially missed an entire sort of learning portion. So it's one of the things we're considering adding in as from an events perspective is coaching and training on that, and to the extent that it can be taught. So, what are your thoughts on the extent to which nature versus nurture for a lot of these skill sets, right? Some people you say, oh, that person's like a born schmoozer, right? Like they didn't need any training, like whatever it is, something about their genetics and their upbringing was this, like you could just put them in a room, they'll own the room, right? And then there are other people where you're like, oh, your initial inclination is they're beyond help. Like, no, we we can't use them as the front lines. So, to what extent, in your experience, can people be, move themselves further into the comfort zone for that kind of experience?
Yeah, I think that you're absolutely right. There are some folks out there that you look at and say they're naturals, but there's also some skills to be learned. I mean, and some folks that you can also kind of, coach through different elements. So again, let's go back to my apocryphal example of Bruce Springsteen. Bruce suffers from anxiety and depression. He's talks openly in his autobiography about how he's been treated for it and medicated for it for years. But one of the ways that he deals with it is understanding what he needs to do when he opens a show. As he said, there's nothing more terrifying than going out on stage and not knowing what you're doing, which is why he's careful in managing his own anxiety that he opens big, that he wants to open the show with something that is such a home run that, as he said, people feel like they've gotten their money's worth 5 minutes into the show, and then he can just relax. So he understands within himself that this is his way of, if he had to build slowly, his anxiety would take over. But by finishing the job in the first 5 minutes, as he says, his anxiety is kind of put to ease. I think as you're training folks in this, and as you're kind of thinking about moving somebody from being a wallflower to being the center of the room, it's important to understand that like there's lots of different degrees you can take. And maybe it's saying to somebody who can own the room, great, go out there and own the room. But the other person, it's, well, while so and so is owning the room, maybe you can own the fringe of the room and look for somebody who is like yourself, a little uncomfortable with being in the center. And can you meet two or three people over the course of this conference and set some concrete goals that aren't, I'm not expecting you to meet 300 people. I'm expecting if you can meet three people and have meaningful contacts with them, that's a success, and doing it on terms that are also helping them understand what are terms they can do that on effectively. If you work better one-on-one, identifying for somebody, here's some good one-on-one networking opportunities. I love the TED conference, but even for the TED conference, when you attend it, is a collection of incredibly extroverted people who have done incredible things, and it can be a little bit intimidating to start just in a circle when you realize, oh, that's Ray Kurzweil. He had been essentially invented artificial intelligence, and over there is Al Gore and whoever it might be. But what I've taken to doing is, well, you also wait in line to get in, for about 20 minutes to get into the conference room. I talk to the person in front of me and behind me in line. And we've got 20 minutes that we're a captive audience. Now, if you're worried about that awkward moment of how do you ever break it off, well, we're going to go into the room and go our separate ways to get our chairs. So, you're not worried about that. It's a very simple strategy that just works for me on how I can meet, several dozen people over the course of the conference, because each session I'll meet the person in front of me and the person behind me. And then I'll say hello to the person sitting next to me before the conference begins. And just that level of being interested can change the dynamic and be very manageable for somebody.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's a lot to be said for the serendipity of those kinds of
Absolutely.
meetings, and you just never know how you can be helpful to somebody who's in front of you or behind you in line.
Absolutely. And just again, it keeps it manageable. I'm not trying to be the center of attention for 20 people that might be captains of industry. I'm just trying to meet a couple of people one-on-one on their terms. And again, if you're interested, and that's something I'll keep going back to, too many people focus on trying to be interesting. Not enough people focus on being interested. And if you're just interested in the folks around you and ask questions, as Big Bird said, it's a good way to find out things, and he was right. Asking some questions and finding out more about those people can make a big difference.
Well, thanks, Andy, for sharing your wisdom. And for folks who want a lot more wisdom from Andy, they should go out and either buy the book, Lead Like the Boss, or do what I did, the Audible version, so that I could multitask and drive while I was listening to it. Thanks again for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Kevin. I appreciate it.
Kevin Lee's Power Marketing is available on all your favorite podcast networks. Kevin loves helping businesses excel at marketing. Having marketing challenges? Just like Santa in The Miracle on 34th Street, if Kevin can't help you, he'll know someone who can. Find him on LinkedIn, subscribe, or follow.